Welcome to the Gavel. I'm Linda Akibi. The 10th Assembly will be coming on board in June 2023. Ahead of the inauguration of the Assembly, keen observers of Parliament are highlighting areas which the 10th Assembly should focus on. On Wednesday, April 19, the network of parliamentary monitoring organizations held a dialogue setting the agenda for youth inclusion in Parliament. Now, this dialogue was put together to stimulate conversation on the role of the legislature as well as youth inclusion in Parliament, and with the aim of improving legislative accountability, transparency, and fostering quality representation. Let's bring you highlights of the dialogue.
As the 10th National Assembly is set to be inaugurated in June 2023, a group of civil society organizations is demanding a robust legislature with youths and women representatives playing pivotal roles in Parliament. The group, under the umbrella of the Nigerian Network of Parliamentary Monitoring Organization, emphasized the importance of the legislature in any democracy and says the inclusiveness of all eligible Nigerians, irrespective of age or gender, is very crucial for its survival. They made the call during a dialogue recently in Abuja. The Executive Director order paper, Mr. Okepia, who was represented by the Program Director, Temitayo Sodiq, spoke on the objective of the advocacy initiative.
What we are trying to achieve with the Popular is a project that has been conceived by this network of parliamentary monitoring organizations as a way of building a critical mass of well-trained and active parliamentary monitoring organizations to mobilize citizens towards raising their voices for improved legislative accountability, as well as to foster greater citizens' trust and cooperation.
Representatives from the federal legislature as well as non-governmental organizations emphasize the need for inclusion of youths in legislative activities, as they constitute over 36% of the voting population, as observed at the just concluded general elections. They also called for openness and transparency of the legislature.
We really need to look at how we can genuinely open the transparency in National Assembly with what is actually obtainable between the management of the National Assembly and parliamentarians, not on perception. I have lived the entire 4 years on a wrong perception of analysis by some opposition within my constituents on what I allegedly received. So I believe that going forward, and especially on the 10th National Assembly, that looking at your agenda, inclusiveness of youths in parliamentarian activities, I can tell you, free of charge, take it to the bank, that when you get these youths, out of 10, you can just get five that have and understand the concept of a true Nigeria. These guys, in the next 15, 20 years, you will see the wonders they will do in Nigeria. My desire is that with what you are doing here today, let it not just be a mere program for the 10th or in getting into the 10th Assembly, but let it be an agenda that you will drive through the next 4 years. That this same meeting today, after 4 years, you review it. That this is how you started, and this is where we are today. In the next 6 months, review this. In the next 1 year, review this. And wheresoever some of these young guys are not really taking it the right way, you still call some of them. Because there is nothing as important as grooming a generation.
This advocacy also aims to build public support for the youth issues and increase the investment in youth through public awareness campaign at the state and national level. We have also championed advocacy drives to increase the capacity and skills development for youths, increase economic empowerment. Youth increased private sector involvement in youth development, established a functional multi-sectoral coordination, and collaboration platform for youth development, and for the establishment of a National Youth Development Fund. We therefore call on the current Assembly to facilitate the review of the National Youth Policy so we can have a robust national guide or document to guide the implementation of the policy content in Nigeria, thereby elevating the economic, improving the quality of life, and stemming negative trends like poverty, unlawful acts, and the nationwide brain drain for the betterment of our country, Nigeria.
We just watched highlights of a dialogue organized by the Network of Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations to discuss youth inclusion in legislative activities. And this is ahead of the inauguration of a 10th Assembly. Now, we had a chat with the Senior Program Executive of Order Paper Advocacy Initiative to discuss the inclusion of young people in Parliament.
The Parliament in Nigeria operates on sort of a closed-door policy kind of operation. It's rarely open, and it's not accountable to its people, in the sense that most often we wake up and we hear about bills that there is no public hearing about. The people were not being at least spoken to give their own take on such bills if really it's what they want. Most times the lawmakers just go ahead to make policies that they feel okay for their own selfish reasons, or they could feel maybe for the executive's reasons. But then the people that they are representing are hardly ever taken into consideration. So there's obviously that disconnect. So it's like, okay, they're doing whatever they're doing at the National Assembly, and we as people are just, once these things come up, we make noise, we ask for a change, but nothing gets done, and then back to business as usual. So there's that disconnect between not just the people, but the youth that largely are a good percentage of the voting public in Nigeria.
We know that, in the National Assembly, the federal legislature, we know that public hearings are actually done, and that is part of the legislative process, that yes, a piece of legislation will not be enacted without a public hearing. So is it a case of the National Assembly is not properly publicizing these public hearings, reaching out to more people? Is that the problem?
Okay, first off, I think we should backtrack to before that public hearing that National Assembly puts out. The sponsor of that bill, before such a lawmaker or whoever it is that sponsored that bill, did you seek consultation from your constituents, the youth there, the women there, persons with disability? Do you seek some sort of consultation that this bill I want to sponsor, how does it affect you? This is what I want to do. What contributions are you willing to make? It has to start from there before you now take it to such a person has sponsored the bill and then the National Assembly calls for a public hearing. I mean, I don't know if you've gone to one of those public hearings before. The rooms are basically something like this. How many people are able to have access? Even those that are able to have access, how many people are they representing? And most times people, yes, to some extent, I'll commend the National Assembly, they are able to publicize. There's a public hearing. If you have any complaints, you can. But then the mechanism for sort of the communication with people, it's difficult. I get to the gate of the National Assembly, how do I drop my contributions or my complaints or whatever it is I want to contribute to that public hearing? That process is very cumbersome. So most times you find people disinterested because they don't want to go through that stress. That's another problem that we're facing. So the process, first of all, is flawed because difficulty in access. And then it's almost as if it's a group thing. So it's not as inclusive as it should be of every sector in this country.
And so how would you, so you are talking, about youth inclusiveness in Parliament, in the process of lawmaking and legislative activities,
yes,
and obviously setting the agenda for the incoming 10th Assembly.
Yes.
And so how would you want to, the 10th Assembly to approach this matter of inclusiveness, to get more people interested, more people to participate in the legislative processes?
Just like I've said, if you're able to have an open door policy where you're transparent as to every process that goes on in the National Assembly, every process, let people, carry people along. That's when people feel included in whatever process you're, and then it even gives more legitimacy to such a process. Be accountable to the people, be transparent. That's one thing I want the 10th National Assembly, not just myself, but I'm sure the youth out there, want the 10th Assembly to be able to give to them. Because basically, like I said, they are the largest voting population. About 60% of the voting population were 25 years to 18. And then another 39.6, were between 25 to 35. So that's largely the voting population was the Nigerian youth. So these people have voted you in, right? So you have some sense of accountability and transparency to give back to them in terms of service delivery. So that's what's expected of the 10th Assembly, to be able to carry the youth along. So it's not like you've put me here, thank you, goodbye. But then there are processes that happen at the National Assembly. How do we include the youths? There are policies. At the popular event with the parliamentary monitoring organizations, of which Order Paper is leading, one of the asks was there's a national youth policy. National youth policy. It's almost like it's just on paper. So how do we implement this policy that says there should be youth inclusion in social, economic, and particularly in this case, parliamentary activities? So how do we make sure that these policies are being implemented in Nigeria? So the 10th Assembly can push for such policies to be implemented by, there's also the Youth Development Bill, Funds Bill that was not passed in the 9th Assembly. The 10th Assembly can also push for that to be accelerated, and that will help further implement the Nigerian youth policy. And likewise, state levels. Most states have not adopted this policy into their state laws. So they need to adopt such policies into their state laws to be able to see results at the end of the day.
I'm going to take you back to, monitoring legislative processes.
Yes.
And so there's a whole lot that happens in the National Assembly. I'm talking about the federal legislature, even at the states, where we're concentrating on the federal legislature. Lots of bills, lots of motions. How are you able to keep track of these legislations passing through the National Assembly? And do you think, is it a difficult process, knowing what laws are being enacted, even knowing what your lawmakers are doing in the National Assembly? Do you think the National Assembly is open enough in this process for Nigerians, particularly young people, to understand what it is they're doing there?
Okay, I think for an organization that actually tracks the activities of National Assembly, which we do at Order Paper, it can be very daunting. I know we do the National Assembly appraisals, where we appraise lawmakers based on the function of bill lawmaking, right? So it's not just the number of bills they've passed, but likewise how well these bills have progressed and of what impact are these bills on the people. So for an average Nigerian, it's very difficult to get such information. But then again, we as a CSO organization at Order Paper try as much as we can to get detailed information on these bills, their level of progression, like I've said, and then inform the public, which that's basically what we're here to do. But then again, going back to your question, it's rather a difficult process because if you visit the National Assembly website, currently as it is, you are most likely not going to get all that information. So it now behoves on us as a people to try as much as possible to feed the public out there with the right, not just any kind of information, but the right kind of information of what's going on at the National Assembly, which is what we do at Order Paper, to try to guide people in terms of this is what is happening, since those who are meant to be accountable to you are not living up to that expectation, which we are hopeful that the 10th Assembly would do better.
We continue with the interview with the Senior Program Executive of Order Paper Advocacy Initiative, Mrs. Regina Udo. Do you think this disconnect, so to speak, between the Nigerians and lawmakers is responsible for the huge turnover rate we see from lawmakers in every assembly? I think this assembly, the 9th, I think it's the highest, the worst so far. We're having over 70% of lawmakers not returning to the 10th Assembly. So do you think this this lethargy, apathy, tediousness in getting information is responsible, for this phenomenon?
Yes, I would say people are getting much more aware of the kind of representation they want, again, which is something we advocate for. What kind of representation do you want? What should you even look forward to when you are seeking representation from your lawmaker? So people are beginning to understand that it's no longer business as usual. I need someone there who would represent my interests. Because again, we keep saying your link to the executive is far much more wider than, how you can get through to your rep and then he gets through to you, to the executive. So the first port of call should be your representative. So people are getting much more aware, I would agree with that, as compared to the 9th Assembly. And that's why I'm really looking forward to this 10th Assembly with the mix of, diverse persons. And we would have loved to see more inclusivity and diversity, but then
in terms of gender.
Exactly. But then one step at a time. And we're hopeful that this 10th Assembly is going to be much more different. It's much more, again, I wouldn't say, because we had a survey that we carried out during the elections that we monitored, that's National Assembly and State House of Assembly elections, where we're just trying to prove that is there really some sort of bandwagon effect when it comes to voting at the National Assembly elections and the State Assembly elections, meaning that both elections are held the same day with the presidential and then the governorship, respectively. So still percentage as high as 63 says that, yes, people still vote based along party lines, presidential candidates, and, other choices.
So your organization with some sister partner organizations in the CSO space, in the legislative space, had a dialogue on youth inclusiveness in Parliament. Could you give us a highlight of what the conference was about and the major takeaways?
Okay. So other paper alongside 14 other organizations that are the organizations that monitored Parliament in Nigeria. Those are the PMOs, Parliamentary Monitoring Organizations of Nigeria, basically came together to hold the popular event whereby we had a discussion with youth in the room, and not just youth. We also had a representative from the current 9th Assembly from Jos, Honorable Bagos. And likewise, we had, like I said, partner organizations that made presentations on youth inclusiveness, particularly as it pertains to the 10th parliament, so to speak. And then we're looking forward to a parliament basically that is open to youth inclusion. Beyond just having youth in the parliament, we've gone beyond that stage in terms of elections have come and gone. But then how does the Nigerian youth now interact or engage with the 10th Assembly? So that's why that activity or rather that event was being held by the PMOs. And then we're calling on the 10th Assembly. Basically, there are certain asks that we released in the communique after the event was being held. So things such as, like I said previously, the Nigerian National Youth Policy. How do we get to implement it? How do we get states to adopt it? That's one aspect of it. Then there are different aspects in that youth policy as to gender in terms of female persons with disability, young persons with disability, young females, young males. How do they get to engage, and then how do they get to participate at the National Assembly level, even though they are not lawmakers? How do they engage their lawmakers? What's that quota awarded to them? As a youth, I need to be heard. The processes, are they being implemented? So those are the type of things that we discussed at the event, so to speak. And likewise, we have a cluster of individuals we know, as we call them, the legislative aces. Those are active citizens engaging the legislature, which is a program run by Order Paper, where we have volunteer youth in Nigeria basically engaging the legislature based on content that Order Paper produces.
Now let's take a look at some activities in the National Assembly during the week.
The House of Representatives Ad hoc Committee, which is investigating the alleged loss of $2.4 billion from illegal sale of 48 million barrels of crude oil, continued its sitting during the week. At the resumption of its sitting on Wednesday, April 19, the committee threatened to summon the Attorney General and the Minister of Finance, as well as the CBN, over the inflows from recoveries from whistleblowers. The committee chairman, Mark Miller, stated this after the invited parties failed to honor the invitation of the committee from last week. The lawmakers say they're not getting any support from the Minister of Finance and the Attorney General, who have failed to respond to any correspondence from the committee. According to the chairman of the committee, documents from the Accountant General's office show payments to whistleblowers and recoveries from whistleblowers, but no evidence to show these monies were expended in accordance with the relevant laws.
There's an incident that was revealed by a whistleblower who made a formal report to the Nigerian Financial Intelligence Unit about $200 million paid into two companies' accounts, Biz Plus and GSCL, allegedly for consultancy services, which allegedly were approved, they say, by the Attorney General's office on the approval of Mr. President. We will make this further appeal to the Honorable Minister of Finance and Attorney General of the Federation and all others who have not responded or have not honored the committee's invitation to do so in the national interest, and in the event that they fail to do so, we will be constrained to proceed to summons and other statutory powers that the committee and the National Assembly can exercise in this regard. And the CBN as well will be required to provide information that has been provided by these whistleblowers about such substantial amounts of money that were paid supposedly and allegedly for consultancy services.
Thank you very much. You can take your leave.
The following day, on Thursday, April 20th, the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, sent a letter to the committee indicating that the ministry is trying to put together a comprehensive response. The committee chairman, who read the letter at the sitting on Thursday, however, says the response is coming a lot later than expected and that the committee will expect the Attorney General to provide the required response and to also appear before the committee next week, Thursday, the 27th of April.
While we appreciate the Attorney General's response, we would like to indicate that it came a lot later than we expected, and it came without the response referred to. So we'll appreciate it if the Attorney General and Honorable Minister of Justice provides this response, and to also appear before the committee next week, Thursday. So let's give him the window to appear before the committee. Unfortunately, the Honorable Minister of Finance has still been evasive. The committee has not received any submission or response from the Honorable Minister of Finance. The Accountant General sent a response and has not responded to our follow-up because we have asked further questions to what he provided us information about.
This investigation by the Reps Ad Hoc Committee on the alleged 48 million barrels stolen crude oil, later sold in China, has elicited interest in the country. Last week, members of a whistleblower network converged at the main entrance of the National Assembly on Tuesday, the 11th of April, to protest against the investigation by an ad hoc committee. Addressing journalists during the protests, the leader of the group, Mr. Joseph Moore, says the investigation of the ad hoc committee on illegal sale of 48 million barrels of crude oil, later sold in China at $2.4 billion, was unnecessary since it's already being litigated against in the court of law. He further says the whistleblowers did not file any petition to the National Assembly for any investigation or hearing. Neither were they called as witnesses to testify during the hearing.
There are two court matters indicted in the FCT High Court led by the Federal High Court against Malam Melami Kayari, NNPC Limited Group CEO, to account for the process of the sales of the stolen crude oil in the National Assembly.
The protest has not deterred the House of Representatives from continuing its investigation into the whistleblower's allegation of illegal sale of 48 million barrels of Nigeria's Bonny Light crude in China in 2015, valued at $2.4 billion.
This is where we call it a day on this week's edition of A Gavel. If you have any views on any of the issues discussed, please email us on thegavel@channelstv.com. Thank you for staying with us and see you again next week.